Hi folks, the Filipina here. And when you visit the Philippines, you're gonna see plenty of couples with large age gaps walking down the street holding hands. Now some of you think that's just fine, but other people have a strong negative reaction. So why is there such a difference of opinion? I recently did several videos that featured people with age differences, and as usual, some of you left comments like, "Ew, that's just sick," referring to the man as a pervert and to the woman as a gold digger. Now, from your perspective, I can understand why it might look so unhealthy, and everyone has a right to their opinion. But what's the reality behind these couples? Is the older man just buying her companionship? Is the woman just selling her youth and beauty? Is love involved? Or is it all just a grotesque fantasy? And how would you even know the difference? Is it just your Western culture that makes you nauseated when you see a man in his golden years and a woman in the flower of your youth sharing a kiss? Or is there something illicit and immoral going on? If you're a man in his 50s or 60s, how would you feel about being with a woman in her 20s? How old is too old? Well, no matter how you look at it, get ready to put aside your preconceived ideas and challenge everything you thought you knew about the age gap. The topic of age gaps is in response to the comments I got about the 50-year-old Filipina who was looking for a man over 70, and about the video I did with John and Jessa, the couple with almost 40 years between them. While most of the comments were positive, there were quite a few people that simply didn't believe there could be real attraction in situations like these, so there had to be other motivations at work. And not only did the folks I interviewed take some heat, but I had shots fired at me as well for glorifying and promoting age gaps. But I didn't glorify or promote anything. I just told their story. My channel is about Filipino culture and what the reality is here. Whether or not it makes you uncomfortable, it's part of life here, so I cover it. Why wouldn't I? Reporting on something is totally different from pushing an agenda, which I don't have. I've devoted whole videos to warning guys about bringing younger women back to the West and the potential dangers of age differences because I tell both sides of the story. But to the people who objected to the video about the 38-year age gap, let me ask you this. What if John and Jessa had a disastrous relationship and it turned out that he was a broken down old sex maniac and she was a gold digger that bled him dry and monkey branched to a rich young doctor in Canada? I bet the complainers would suddenly love the video and it wouldn't bother him a bit that I covered it. Now, I would have done the story either way, of course. So, who's got the agenda? Who's got the bias? Well, I think I just proved it ain't me because I just follow the story wherever it leads. But how can people look at the same video and draw such different conclusions about the people in it? Because all of us, whether or not we want to admit it, carry around preconceived ideas, and when we look at an older man with a much younger woman, we already think we know what it's all about. And if you make a comment like, "Ugh, big age gaps are disgusting," that's an opinion that you have every right to hold, but it's just an opinion. I think blue cheese is disgusting. So what? If you can't tell me why something's gross except that it makes you feel yucky, then it doesn't really carry much weight, just like my opinion about cheese. If you say that big age gaps are objectively wrong or immoral, then you've made a claim, and you should be able to defend it. You're welcome to post that comment too, but I hope you'll tell us why you think your claim is correct. Now, most people who object to these relationships say that the woman's not even attracted to the guy she's with. But if two people are together based on both of them getting a mutual benefit, who cares if it's not all about having the tingles for each other? Do you really think Western women only marry because they want to rip the clothes off their husbands? If you think that, you've been brainwashed by the same blue pill Disney fantasy that got you guys into trouble in the first place. What's wrong with a woman choosing a man she thinks is a good match, even if he's not 6 feet tall, young and rich? Not many women have that opportunity around here. So as long as she's not being forced to sell herself or ending up with someone that mistreats her, who am I to pass judgment? I also also hear how we Filipinos supposedly have to hold our noses and just grin and bear it every time we sleep with our older foreign partners. Well, I can honestly say I've never heard a single Filipina complain about that, and I know plenty of Filipinas in age gap relationships. The people who say that just can't understand how we could be physically attracted to older foreigners. So let me try to explain why that's not necessarily the case. What we see when we look at you is not what you see when you look at yourselves. Even a guy you call ugly might actually be considered cute here. A man that never got any attention back home because of his big nose, or the shape of his face, or his below average height might be seen as attractive here. And if you don't believe that, just look at the reverse situation. Filipinos that don't get looked at by local guys because we're too skinny or too dark are the ones that foreigners go for. The same thing happened to me. I was never a head turner, but once I started running into foreigners, I started getting noticed a lot more. For the very same reasons that local guys passed me by. I was too slender and my skin was too brown. You'll find that many Filipinas can't believe that foreigners think we're attractive and don't understand why you pick us over our lighter-skinned, curvier competition. So just because you don't see anything special when you look in the mirror doesn't mean that we won't. But what about the age thing? Don't Filipinos see an older guy with liver spots and run the other way? Well, it might blow your mind, but here's the truth. Most of us actually prefer some age on a man. Ask almost any Filipina, and she'll tell you that younger guys can be a less desirable option when you're looking for a long-term mate. Men in their 20s or early 30s are not as mature, and we usually think they're a greater risk to walk out on us. Remember the video with a 50-year-old woman who wants a man in his mid-70s? The reason she gave for wanting an older guy was so he wouldn't leave her. Well, it's the same thing with younger Filipinos too. So does that mean that younger Westerners are gonna have trouble finding a partner? No, it just means that for every 5 Filipinas that want a young guy, there are 10 women that want an older man. I know that sounds crazy, but the reason it sounds crazy is because of the differences in our cultures. In your world, a woman in her prime would never even look at a guy in his 50s or 60s. I get that. I understand that's the way your culture is. But why can't you seem to understand mine, even after I explain it over and over? It's also because some of you are positive that all women are the same, and culture has nothing to do with it. You say things like, women don't have posters of old men on their bedroom walls. Well, that sounds like a profound observation, but it just doesn't apply here. Because for us, attraction doesn't hinge in looks, and a man's looks don't fade the way a woman's do anyway. Personally, when it comes to having a relationship, I'd be far more attracted to an older, more mature partner. And as I already said, I'm not the only Filipina that feels that way. But many of you just refuse to believe it. So you turn to the only other thing you can think of, money. It must be all about money. That's the only explanation that's left. So it just has to be that. Or you'd have to admit that yes, Filipinos are actually attracted to older men. Sometimes much older. You say things like, Filipinos just want older guys so they'll die faster and leave him all their stuff. But take a closer look at the video I did with John and Jessa. Didn't you see the way she fussed over him, held his hand, and rubbed his back after 14 years of marriage? He doesn't have any assets to tempt her with, and she's making more money than he is. She could leave him in 2 seconds if she wanted to, and jump to another guy, but she hasn't. And I'll bet you my last peso that she won't. So what's that all about? Could it be that she actually loves a guy almost 4 decades older than she is? In her case, as with many others, it's not about the money. But let's talk about when it is. One of the situations that seems to anger people is when a woman's poverty allows a man to take advantage of his wealth to virtually buy a woman, usually by giving support to her family. Some people assume this has to be against the woman's will, and she's allowing herself to be handed over to some disgusting old pig with all sorts of sexual perversions. She's obviously just doing it because of a misguided sense of loyalty to her family, sacrificing her life and happiness. Now, that's making an awful lot of assumptions. But how often does that actually happen? Well, I've hung around mixed couples for a lot of years, and I've never even seen a situation where I thought a woman wasn't glad to be where she was. Now, am I saying it never happens? Of course it happens. I even made a video about economic coercion in places like Samar, and I explained why it occurs. It's horrible and tragic. Now, if you can come up with a solution or some law that would fix things so stuff like that never happens, then let me know and I'll support it. But that's the exception, not the rule. The majority of age gap relationships are good for both parties, and there's usually love and respect. I also hear people say, what could a man possibly have in common with a woman half his age? Well, let me try to explain it. You'll often find that older Filipinas aren't necessarily more compatible with you just because they're closer in age. Older Filipinas usually don't speak English as well as the younger generation. And despite what you might expect, they're often more naive when it comes to knowing about the world. Don't expect to have deep and meaningful conversations with a Filipina just because she's your own age. Life can be very repetitive here, especially in the province. And people often wake up, do the same chores, see the same things, talk to the same people, and pretty much think the same thoughts, day after day, year after year. Sometimes we don't change very much just because the years pass. So when you say, what could I possibly talk about with a 25-year-old woman? Sometimes it's actually the same conversation you'll have with a 50-year-old woman, except with better English. But maybe you just prefer an older woman. Then that's great, and that's my point. Be with whoever makes you happy. If you ask me, there are only two legitimate problems with large differences in age that we haven't mentioned. The fact that the Filipina is probably going to end up a widow, and that if they have kids, an older man might not even see him graduate from high school. But as long as they discuss it and plan for it, then who are we to say it's not worth it or that it's the wrong thing to do? And finally, for those people who are still against relationships between older men and younger women, just how much of an age gap is acceptable in your opinion? Exactly where does it cross the line? If you say 10 years, then what about 11? If you say 30 years, then what about 31? And would you have the same objection if it was an older woman and a younger man? Well, maybe this discussion hasn't changed a single person's mind, but at least I hope it got us all thinking about it. My only advice is to consider the compatibility of the individual and the quality of relationship you can have with them, not just how many birthdays they've seen. Well, that's it for today's episode, and I'll be back on Friday with something else to consider. Till then, folks. If you think about it, I'm kind of like your nurse, attending to your needs and making sure you get a healthy dose of what's good for you in the form of informational and funny videos. After all, laughter is the best medicine. The only thing I ask for my service is that you hit the thumbs up for this video and subscribe to my channel. And while you're recuperating, why not enjoy my other videos too? So, are you ready?